As I mentioned, I'd like to welcome Dr. Belinda Daniels to this session here, and I'm going to be reading her bio before she gets started. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that Belinda will be doing about a 15-minute presentation for this session. Once she's done her presentation, I have some general questions that I'm going to be asking her on behalf of the group, but there will also be opportunities for you to ask questions after she's responded to some of the general questions that we've put together for her. And in addition to that, if you have any questions that you would like to ask her, there's also a chat. If you want to throw your questions in there, we will try and address those as well. Corinne will be watching to see if there are any questions as we move along. We'll try not to interrupt the presentation part of it for now. So bear with me. I have Dr. Belinda Daniels' bio here that I'd like to share with you. Dr. Belinda Daniels is from the community of Pagitawagan, Sagayan, hopefully I said that right, Sturgeon Lake First Nation, Saskatchewan. Now a faculty member with the University of Victoria and founder of a not-for-profit organization called Nehiyawetan Language Experience. Kakiyoseo holds a PhD from the University of Saskatchewan, Interdisciplinary Department. She was awarded the Outstanding Indigenous Education Award of 2015 by the Canadian Teachers Education. She also has been recognized by the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations for her exceptional work in Indigenous language revitalization. Finally, she has been recognized globally as one of the top 50 finalists for the Global Teacher Prize of 2016. A few projects completed by Dr. Daniels was at a national level for the National Center for Collaboration on Indigenous Education. She co-published a book called Nehiyawetan, kikinahk, Speaking Cree in the Home, which is this year, 2022, with her colleague, Andrea, and then a how-to guide for creating a language camp. Belinda is in the midst of co-authoring another book on the topic of learning survival phases for immersion settings in an Indigenous language. Kakiyoseo volunteers on several boards, including the Foundation of Endangered Languages, FEL Canada, the Canadian Modern Language Editorial Board, and is a collaborator researcher for the, I can't say this, NETOLNEW. I don't know what it stands for, my apologies.
Natolnu.
Okay, there you go. And sits on the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, focusing on the decade of Indigenous languages. Lastly, Belinda is married and has 4 children and a new grandchild. Kakiyoseo is grateful to be a visitor to the island of Victoria, where she lives and works. So please allow me to welcome Dr. Belinda Daniels for this part of the session. Miigwech. Go ahead, Belinda.
Hi, Kanaskumtan Miigwech, Violet. I do want to say that I'm grateful and incredibly honored that Siller has invited me to be a part of this speaker series. I'm incredibly grateful. So again, thank you for the invitation. So I did prepare a PowerPoint for today's talk. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to take you on a journey of the making and the creating of this current book, and then how other things kind of weaved in and out of my relationship, kinship with Andrea, Custer, and others. I do believe that language revitalization and reclamation work has to be done collaboratively with others. And it's not like a one show gig. So with that, so with that, I created this presentation, and I just sort of kind of like just have like just notes from memory as I'm telling you the story. So this Nehiyawetan kikinahk has been like a long time process endeavor. And so this is my story of how it came to become a reality. So with my friend, and now I call her Nissimus, I call Andrea Custer my little sister. We met 8 years ago at the Canadian Indigenous Language and Literacy Development Institute at the University of Alberta. Here she was introduced to me as my intern. She was a brand new teacher just coming out of the U of A program. And so since then, our relationship has grown into a flourishing relationship amongst sisters. And so with that, I just have a couple of pictures here. I was first introduced to Sildi during my master's back in 2003. And I took at least 3 to 4 classes through that program. And this is where my passion for language revitalization was like ignited. And so I took a few classes during my master's, and then I came back as an instructor. And then when I came back as an instructor, this is when I met my colleague and friend, Andrea. Since the development of our relationship, I've asked Andrea to come and volunteer at the Nehiyawetan language experience, where she actually came as like an intern the first couple of years. She's kind of like cut out, but she's over here in the corner. And this is my home community of Bagitawagan, Sagagan, Sturgeon Lake First Nations. And I'm very fortunate and very privileged because I have many family members that still live in my home community that support the work that I do. And so again, I don't do all this work by myself. My uncles, and cousins often come out and help me do this work. And so because I have this relationship with Andrea, but also with other language teachers, we are able to check in on each other, not just in formal settings. We've created friendships where we now like visit each other. We go and visit each other in each other's homes. We take walks, we go out for coffee, we have breakfasts and suppers whenever we're within each other's presence. And so I think this is really viable when it comes to creating successful language immersion camps, when you have those informal relationships with your colleagues, and then we're creating this kinship system going back to Nehiyawetan concepts. And so we're becoming kin through these learning language experiences where we've actually informally adopted each other. So we're creating family. And the children get to see this healthy relationship. So along with my relationship with Andrea, I've been able to take her with me wherever I went. There was a short stint where I was the president for the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Center for 6 months, and I got Andrea to come with me as a curriculum writer, and then she went on to teach in my home community of Sturgeon Lake First Nations. At the time, I sat on the education board for my home community. And I still advise to varying different degrees for my home community. So along with not only teaching language and doing language work together, I often introduced Andrea, along with my colleagues, other language learning methods. And I've been able to teach my friends and colleagues just different methods. For instance, the American Sign Language method. I actually currently take classes and have ongoing training with ASL. And so I implement that in the language experience program and with speaking Cree in the home. Task-based learning is also very instrumental in learning Cree in a natural setting. And so with these language methods, I will often share with others how to do these different methods the best way that we can. Of course, Dorothy Thunder, I met her at Sildy, and so she already has a lot of these methods. She already had a lot of these methods. Bill and Randy and Andrea were all new to NLE, and so again, our relationships expanded over the summers, and yeah, we relate to each other as brother and sister. And so my big objective when it comes to learning Cree, acquiring Cree naturally, is that I've always looked outside of the mainstream education system, because I believe that schools alone haven't been the most successful places. And I still grapple with schools teaching our languages, given the history of residential schools. And that we're still working through this as Indigenous peoples, how to use this site of reclaiming language that is the mainstream education system. So I often thought about where else can I teach the language, and included Andrea in this process, as well as my friend Randy Morin. And so I started creating, this is when I got the notion to create a not-for-profit organization, and then started working with other not-for-profit community organizations that were heavily indigenously populated, in the community and out on the land. So these are the different peoples that I've worked with and still continue to work with over language revitalization objectives, I suppose. So when looking at teaching Cree in a home, I often, look for other research, successful stories, what is working, what is not working, like around the world. And I found this project. This project took place in New Zealand, of course, the Maori language, and speaking the Maori language in the home. And I thought this was pretty important to mention, and I'll just read it to you. The problem is that if people with the capability to speak te reo reserve their language for only formal occasions, then the competence to communicate satisfactorily in these crucial contexts is reducing our language. and our language is still endangered. Put more simply, if there are no locations where informal language use is stable, we certainly have a substantial problem ahead of us in our fight for language regeneration. So this complements the work that I'm doing. I'm teaching language outside of the mainstream education system because I've had the experience of learning Cree at the university level, introductory Cree, the next varying levels of Cree classes that I took. And it was all very formal language. And where I was after the informal language. And I started doing this and thinking about this like a long time ago when my son was first born, and that was in the year of 2000, and shared my ideas with Andrea Custer in speaking the language in the home in the most natural way. And so what I did at the time in the year 2000 is I got my no kumpan to come and live with me, and started documenting and recording what we were doing and what we were learning when it came to informal language acquiring. And then this is what spurred on the Nehiyawetan language experience programs. And then eventually the book that is what this talk is about. And so with that, I invited Andrea to come and teach with me in the evenings in Saskatoon, and we called it Bring Cree Home for Dinner. And so this is, again, was based on task-based learning, creating mini sessions of immersion, but with terminology in the Cree language. And we were eating and speaking and preparing food in the Cree language, which again was like some ideas that I had with my late grandmother and my son in the year 2000. I kept track of like where was the most abundance of language use in my home. And again, that was around dinner. That was around the kitchen table. And it was around like, you know, those family encounters that you have with your children. So terminology that I got my grandma to teach us was like around bath time with my son, waking up in the morning, getting ready for school, that kind of language. And just language that you use sitting around the house is what I kept track of. And so I came back to this idea with a partnership that I have with Reed Saskatoon, which is now, they've changed their name to Foundations Learning. We came together and came up with working together in this program called Cree, Bring Cree Home for Dinner. And it was really successful. And this was pre-COVID. So it would sell out. And because we had real food and we had babysitting supplied, and we did fun things around the kitchen table. So then these dinner activities expanded into what other types of activities do we do with our children and our families in the home? And so what the objective was to reclaim and regenerate the domain of mothering in our homes. So this is a picture of Andrea and I and our children. And these two have known each other since they were quite little. Scar and Lily. And this is her new baby. And so with that, along with the book that we're learning about, we met in Prince Albert, kikinahk, and I was like, okay, so these classes, Bring Cree Home for Dinner, are pretty successful. We should have like a guide of some sort so that learners can have something to walk away with, like a product. And so I thought, well, let's create let's create this. Let's create a language guide. And then it expanded as I worked through my dissertation. This book, we submitted this about 2 years ago. So it takes quite a long time to write a book, submit it, and there's quite a process. Like, you need all kinds of permission. I needed all kinds of permission because I was using parts of my dissertation. It was peer reviewed. So it went out to 2 or 3 people. We needed someone with substantial experience in language revitalization, and that's where Solomon Ratt came in, and he wrote the foreword. And then we asked Dr. Lana Whiskey Jack to be our illustrator. I met her at one of the very first Nehiyawetan language experiences. She came to my home community with her family like almost 18 years ago. And so this is why I say in the beginning, language revitalization work is very much a collective process. Lots of people need to be involved to make language reclamation happen. And so with that, the first half of the book is about the history of the Cree people. So that was me digging deep into anthropological early illustrations of what was going on the land of the Nehiyawetan people, and looking at what traders were writing about, early explorers, early missionaries. What were they seeing? What were they documenting? And reading all of those transcriptions to figure out our history, and making sure that it, it compared to the orality of our history. And so again, that section took some time, and I wasn't even done that part when I submitted the book. So I do hope to have a part 2 of a more finished product in regards to scholarly findings and illustrations of historical records when it comes to the history of the Nehiyawetan. This is another thing that I'm working on. Anyhow, so the first part of my book comes from my research. I then asked Andrea to create lesson plans for the second part of the book, and we needed a transition piece. And so this is where in the middle of the book, we talk about decolonization. And Andrea tells a personal story of reclaiming language from this aspect, where we go from this big picture of just the lay of the land and how land is connected to our identity. And then we go into language loss, and then language reclamation through decolonization, and what that meant and felt like for Andrea, and the experience that she went through, because she's a fluent speaker. And along with our friendship, kinship relationship, she often spoke to the fact that she didn't initially find any value in her language, which is a result of colonialism and colonization, and what mainstream education does to our fluent speakers. The dominant discourse of English and the ways of being for the colonial mindset erases how we feel about our own languages and our identities, and it's done on purpose. So that's the kind of like the middle part of the book. And then as a response to our long relationship and our collaborative work, what we've been doing is pretty successful. I've since included Andrea in doing scholarly writing. I'm mentoring her how to be a researcher in an academic setting. And as a result of working together, she too is also applied to UVic, where I actually invited her to the PhD program in ILR. And so at the University of Victoria, we don't have a PhD program. We do have like a special case by case where we see people with potential who could help build up ILR in our faculty at our college. And so this is why Andrea now has been accepted into the program. And this program runs every 2 years. We take a new intake every 2 years. And so I just wanted to point out that ILR work, I've been in it like all my life, like my whole life. And I've been able to see and like who's been there doing the work too, what are some successful programs. I believe in research, and I'm always looking for, the evidence that our language programs are working. And so as a result, because of the language work that I've been involved in over my whole employment career, I look for other places to disseminate ILR work. That's just not for the Indigenous sector, but I'm also interested in educating mainstream academic scholars who are involved in languages, such as teaching English as a second language, looking at what the French language scholars are doing. I've had the opportunity to travel to Norway and look at what the Sami people were doing when it came to ILR work. And so I guess I'm always looking at the bigger global aspects when it comes to ILR work. And so I've been able to read and submit to academic journals, magazines, of course. I've had experience speaking on the radio and doing podcasts and attributing to websites when it came to ILR work, and being involved in mainstream committees. I believe doing this kind of work also helps elevate our Indigenous languages and helps people become responsible to lift up the Indigenous Languages Act. And so with that, I'm not sure, I haven't been keeping track of time, but I do have some Q&A time now. And I guess before I close, some advice I would like to share is that, again, ILR is collaborative work. ILR needs relationships. New approaches and methods are still being developed when it comes to reclamation. Print with audio resources are beneficial, and implementing natural ways of being and doing to acquire and learn a language that is informal. This is what works. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I just wanted to share this piece that Violet spoke to in my introduction. This is like the next piece that I'm working on with Randy Morin and Christy Belcourt. This will come with sound files. And so this book will help learners prepare themselves for an immersion setting. So with that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, Belinda. What I'd like to do now is we did prepare some general questions for you for this part of the session, but I know that you've addressed some of them already, so I'm going to try and switch them over a little bit, and I will proceed to ask those general questions. I have about 5 or 6 questions I'd like to ask as the facilitator, and then I just wanted to let the participants know as well that we will open it up to your questions once we've addressed the questions that we've put together for this presentation. And we can't forget about the questions and comments in the chat box as well. So we will be addressing those too. Okay. Well, first of all, congratulations to your book. I did get a chance to read it as well, and it's an awesome book. Actually, when I first picked it up to read it, I couldn't stop reading it, and I think I was able to read it in about 2 sittings. So, I would encourage those of you out there, that are language advocates or language educators, take a read on this book. It's very current, but it's also has a lot of historical information about the Cree language, and that's what I liked about it. It kind of gave you an overview of the Cree language here in Alberta, where it originated from, and so forth. And the other part that I really liked about this book is that you hear those narratives, from 2 language champions, one who is learning Cree as a second language, and the other being a fluent Cree speaker, and just providing that additional support, and that passion to continue learning our languages. So I was really excited when I first got. Actually, this is a borrowed copy. I started writing on it, and I don't think Heather's going to be very happy with me. But anyway, I'm going to ask some of these questions because I think I would like to give others a chance as well. Okay, maybe if you can give us another example of any successes or challenges about this book or about your personal journey as a language learner.
Personal challenges.
Successes or challenges?
Okay. So with the book, I find what you just mentioned in regards to successes is that we wanted a book that was easy to read for all ages in the home. So my 11-year-old daughter can pick this up and read it. And that's what we wanted it for. We wanted it to be for families who necessarily were not going to university taking Cree 101 or Cree 110, or who didn't have the means to come to language camps or to make it to community language events. And this is why it's like easy to read, and I believe that's a success for others to overcome those types of challenges.
Okay, miigwech for that response. I guess there are many favorite aspects of the book that you can share with us, but can you share maybe a couple of aspects with us?
I really like, and what my children pointed out was the fact that there is like a personal, or there is like this historical aspect of who we are and where we come from. Those of us who come from Pagkatuwagan Sagayagan, I link it back to the Pehonan Cree during treaty time, and then I link it back to the Begogogomal Cree, which was a macro band of the Nehiyawetan people. And then I was able to ask Solomon Rat about that word, Begogomal, which basically means broken shore, of the river. And so literally our place names are attached to our identity and the names of who we call ourselves. And so that to me is a favorite thing, because those are the types of things that my own children ask me. Where did we come from? Where did we come from? And another thing they would always ask me about was, if we were so powerful, how did we lose so much? And so that part too is also answered in the book when I talk about the whole colonization and assimilation process.
Okay, thank you for that response. I just want to mention as well that this book is out of print now, right? Because I called University of Regina Press. They said they didn't have any more copies.
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess another good reason why that this book became so powerful, you know, for language educators in general. So congratulations for that as well. My next question is about how you were able to connect Indigenous knowledge and learning to speak your ancestral language. Like, how did those two areas influence your work?
I believe that I was influenced since the day I was born. I was influenced through being raised by my grandparents. I was influenced by the land that I grew up on. And just those concepts and values were taught to me. Since the beginning. And so I've always just had those influences a part of me, and it's pretty much how I operate.
Okay, miigwech for that. I have two general questions I want to ask, and then we'll leave it open to the other participants after I finish asking these questions. What other advice would you give current language educators about supporting Indigenous language revitalization?
Yeah, I wrote something down in that regard. Current language educators. Well, yeah. I guess it depends on where they're teaching. Again, I've said this, and I'll say it again. Cree language learning or any Indigenous language learning cannot be left to the responsibility of the schools alone, and that it has to be a part of the community and the families of those children attending your schools. And language educators, the advice I would give to them is try to be a part of the curriculum process, because I know that we have curriculum writers in our mainstream education sectors. Those curriculum writers, for the time being, are informed in the mainstream way of thinking, which schools don't even understand our pedagogy. And so if language educators can get involved in curriculum work at a master's level and a PhD level, that would be helpful. But it's not the one and end be all. But for now, working in the school systems, that's the advice I'd give. And I'd also challenge I know that there's set aside minutes when teaching subjects in school, like 300 minutes a year for math, 300 minutes a year for English, 300 minutes a year for phys ed. And then what are the language minutes for our Indigenous languages? And try to implement all those disciplinaries so you have more minutes in the language. to teach the language in our home First Nations communities. I know that would be harder to do in mainstream education, but challenge the minutes taught in our First Nations schools and move towards bilingualism or immersion.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's very true for many of our communities across Canada. I know that in Manitoba, we're still offering Indigenous languages as a subject, which means, some students only get 30 minutes of language per day, or even less. By the time you settle them down, then it's time to leave. I have one last question, and then I'll open it up to the participants. Is there anything that you would like to highlight, or anything else that you would like to share with the participants at this time?
What would I like to highlight? Find other people who are passionate about the language as you begin to develop relationships and kinship systems with them to make language happen in your home communities. Do the legwork before, I guess, we can do the actual hard work, the heart work when it comes to language reclamation.
Okay, that's very, very good advice, Miigwech, for that. So we're going to open it up. How do I get back to the main screen? Anybody? Corinne, how do we get back to the main screen? Because I want to maybe monitor some of the questions that are going to be asked.
Okay, the main screen, you should be able to just like exit or minimize whatever window you're in.
I have a question, Belinda. You talked about communities and going back to your community. There's so many people that are in an urban environment, and how do we create these spaces, I've heard a lot about like creating safe space for language learning, and how do we, what would be your advice, I guess, the urban context for language?
Again, yeah, I totally understand what you mean by that. So this is why I created this partnership with other not-for-profit organizations in my home community of Saskatoon at the time, because I do realize a lot of our people don't have those connections to First Nations communities anymore. And so I just basically would, make myself visible, knock on doors, get to know people, be involved in community initiatives in the city. And so not only was I approached by the not-for-profit organization Read Saskatoon, but I also went to the local theater company. I also went to the local arts organization. I looked for other community not-for-profit organizations that had heavy Indigenous engagements, and created those language programs with them. And I'm also like a high school teacher. I was also a high school teacher for 20 years before I became a professor. And again, I was asked that question about like urban Indigenous youth. And so again, I was able to create like a couple of programs. I created a community garden, a huge community garden with another teacher. So again, relationships are always key when you're trying to progress. And so now there's a huge community garden in the school where I just left. I was able to create a boys warrior club with 2 other teachers from my home community. And I brought a couple of boys with me from the urban setting because again, they don't have a First Nations connection. But you always have to find like-minded people to progress. And the third thing that I did was, what was the third thing? That one. Okay, maybe there's just two. Sorry. Yeah. So I always try to think of the possibilities. What are the possibilities?
Thanks, Belinda. I'd also just before just turn it over to Mary, because I had given Mary one of your books.
Yeah.
And just see if she has any comments to add.
It's a very interesting little book. And these are a lot of these are my experiences too. And except I'm not in the process of I think we always are, but I'm not in the process of acquiring the language. So it's really I am involved in because of my age, I'm not as all over the place like I used to be. And so I had to think of ways to contribute, I guess, instead of just being a mouthpiece on committees. So I took on, and I had been interested in this before because I had seen this model being used in other provinces, but seemed like Alberta wasn't moving that way. But now they have, I guess. And it is that master apprentice approach. So now I have an apprentice. We meet on. So I brought this book. I bought it. It's not. I didn't buy it. By the way, thank you. I was looking for it though, and Pam got it for myself, and my apprentice and I looked at it, and there's some really good ideas in there. One of the things that you mentioned, Belinda, what's the one with the dinner? You're supposed to do activities in your home, I suppose. So again, it ties in with this book. So she's been my apprentice. Her name is Patricia anyway. She's an interesting apprentice because she's I don't think she'd mind me sharing this. She's a 60 scoop and she's not Cree even. She's a carrier. But she's in Cree country, so she started taking Cree language at the university level. And I guess she's motivated enough to do it in her spare time. So our mainly, and it's a real for a person who doesn't like to cook, myself. She comes and cooks dinner for me, so I like that part. Now I gotta talk her into learning all the cleaning terms, so I can bring her to my house and she can clean my house. You got to be devious, eh? When you're Nutsuguesu. Anyway, part of our activities are usually around eating mitso, and it's we're supposed to speak a minimum. We're not supposed to speak any English. We're supposed to switch to there are guidelines that are provided from I think the model started in California, but it's been used in BC in some of the First Nation communities, and also in Yukon. I saw it being used there. So, but everybody, it seems like everybody's is a little different. They have a little bit of a different take on it. And I think she told me the other day, and we haven't been doing this that long, is she said some of my fellow students have told me my pronunciation is improved, which is good, because we have to, aside from doing the sessions, keep on going, it's being administered by Blue Quill's First Nations University, and it's the assessment, I guess, that's should be ongoing, and so we have to think of ways on how we can do that. Other than that, it's a good little document, eh, for Patricia and myself, who refer to it probably in she's gonna have to get a copy of the book too. If I could order it for Christmas, I would, but I heard that they're having a hard time with extra copies. So, so with that, it's a good little document to refer to at all times for a person who is learning the language, no matter what level they're at.
Hi. Miigwech for that, Mary. I'm going to ask Belinda if she wanted to maybe respond to some of Mary's comments, and then we'll open it up to another participant.
Hi. Tinige, kinanas kumten, kituan, itwewana, miasem, Nehiyawetan, kituan, dwena. Hi.
Okay, is there anybody out there that would like to ask a question or give a comment? If not, we can go into the chat box, because I noticed that there's a number of comments and questions there.
I have a question.
Okay, Molly.
I want to ask Dr. Belinda Daniels. I read most of your articles online, and also I believe what you said with your friend there, how your friend has like some of us fluent speakers, we really know our language, we live it, but when it comes to teaching it, my friend from a different reserve, she speaks a different language, and she was telling me that she won't teach or speak her language to her children, because what you said about the colonial discourses around language retention and how we have lost that connection to being proud of our heritage and our identity, and that has connections to place names on the land stories. Although we know many of those, over the years, there's like, we are told to not talk about those things. And it kind of takes root in our history and how the revitalization processes enables the passing on of the language is very difficult, because you think it's too hard and you don't try to pass it on, because you think if I do that, then those kids aren't going to do good in school. Those kinds of beliefs are some of the reasons why lots of people don't want to even try talking to the younger generation. And for I have to tell you that that's not only the reason, because they keep taking away kids from families. The child welfare system continues the child removal, and that cuts off the generation to want to learn. And when they come back, they're very, they don't like their culture, they don't like their language, and they treat our generation like we're not important. And it's like that. And there's a lot of intergenerational trauma and abuse, and that makes it really hard. But some of us, we talk our language to our kids, our children, and some of our children are very fluent in 2 or 3 dialects in our languages. And for those kinds of things, we should be proud, because as Dene, I think sometimes I'm wasting my time, like Mary said, we're just on this board or on that board, and it's just, we say things and that's it. We're useless. And for me, I feel that way sometimes. And I feel like I'm not Cree, and I'm not, nobody wants to write Dene, but on the other side, I know our songs, our chants, and it has words, and we can sing them today. Like, I know that there are really good drum songs in Dene that I know, because my family drum most of their lives. And like you said, if I go to the theater, I could teach the young people how to sing in Dene. And we don't have to do Mariah Carey's Cree version, but we can do something in Dene, and I'll be proud of myself for having done that. And those are some of the things that, you know, that divides us and people. The colonial constructs really likes to divide us in those contexts, and it can be very divisive, and it's very scary because I see it, I feel it, and it's very oppressive. And you said just go to those places where you feel welcome or being part of. So living in the city and being Dene is very tough, very hard. And sometimes I feel like there's not very much support for us. And I feel like I'd rather go to Victoria because there's more Dene over there. And maybe I'll sing my songs and dance and get up and dance and really shoot to the moon and back and take my little great grandson with me, and he will speak my language and I will talk to him and I will lift him up and he will lift me up if he talks back to me. And that's what I do. I talk to that little baby and he just brightens up and he puts his hand up towards me, and his mom is saying to me, "What are you telling him?" And I said, "I'm telling him to put his arms up," and he is actually doing it. And he's only 3 months old. And they say in our languages, children learn really fast between 0 to 5 years old. So I'm gonna keep talking to him. And I'm sorry if I said too much, but I just feel as important to my identity and to my language, because I can't say it enough, because we are facing that, what do you say it? Systemic, institutionalized systemic racism. And it's very, very scary place. And we all know it. And we have to get up and be part of that talk. And if we say it more in our language, maybe we will teach each other.
Okay. Hi, Miigwech, Masicho. Belinda, did you want to respond to Molly's words of wisdom, or can we go into the chat box?
Just thank you, Molly. We can go into the chat box.
Okay, so Corinne, there's some questions there about the names of books. So maybe you can pick a couple from the chat box, which would be good information for everybody.
Yeah, you bet. And also I just want to be aware of the time. So it is 2:30. And first of all, I know Cheryl, you had asked, you wanted to see what was the last book that Belinda held up earlier. I don't know if she had a sequence there of, so you could have the title.
Mate Atsiao Nehiyawetan. So this one's not quite done yet. So hopefully it'll be out in the new year.
Thank you.
Another question on here was this book itself, how oriented it is for adult learners. It's for everyone. There's no age limit, from youth right to kikinahk. And then you asked the question, any regional changes? This is the Y dialect, Treaty 6 territory. Y dialect, Treaty 6 territory extends into Alberta, and maybe just a snippet of Manitoba, but central Saskatchewan for sure. And it doesn't, like dialects, like, I don't think we need to get hung up on regional differences. Like my friend is TH dialect, who I write the book with. And I have friends from the N dialect. And again, the more dialects you have and understand, the better that is. The more diversity and rich ways you can say different things is good. The other question was, could I get the name of the books recommended in the presentation? Where can I purchase this book? This book is printed by the University Regina Press, and I was able to connect with them. A new batch is coming in the new year, maybe late January or early February. The first run of the book, they printed 1,200 copies and they were sold out like within a couple of weeks. So that's pretty exciting and a big deal. Yeah.
Wow, does that mean there's going to be another print run soon?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good.
In the new year.
Awesome. Another question in the chat is, I'm very interested in task-based learning and importance of the home. Can you share more about how this was received, and did you have to convince folks or organizations or communities about the relevance?
Okay, you got a lot of questions in there.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Sure. Can you share more about how this was received? So that's on the task-based learning, the importance of the home. And maybe I'll just start with that.
Okay.
How was it received?
So the importance of language in the home. I don't know how to answer that. That's, to me, that just sounds like, for me, the response was incredible. This is where language should be happening and should be done like immediately. So I think that's just a natural given. And then
did you have to convince folks or organizations or communities about that relevance?
No.
Yes, I'm coming. I asked the question, and I completely agree about the importance of the home, and I'm really excited about your work. And I guess where my question was coming from is when I've have discussions with organizations or educators, there's often this focus on academic success and employability. So when I talk about the home and informal language and how important that is for language maintenance, for the communities and families I work with, there's that instant, like you said, like, yes, that's where it is, and that's where our heart is, and we need to do it there. And then beyond that, there's seems like there's not that, it's not as understood. I don't know if maybe you haven't experienced that in this, in your work.
I have gotten the response about, like, initially when I first started out in reclaiming language and doing language work, like, not everybody was in my corner. My own friends would say, why are you doing that? Where is that going to get you? How is that going to make you employable? Or their attitude towards our language was just very negative. But I've been at this now for 20 years, and I have to commend my home community and my family for supporting me, and the friends and the kinship systems that I've made. You got to find people in your corner who are going to support you through your work. And as far as that employability benchmark goes from mainstream education, the terminology that I'd like to share is that it's besides the point that it's about being employed. This is an inherent right. As Indigenous peoples, we have our own inherent right to be who we are and to teach education the way we want to teach it. it's also one of those truth and reconciliation calls to action. We don't have to, what's the word? We don't have to defend whether it's employable or not. There are far-reaching benefits when it comes to wellness and being healthy and having this positive identity about ourselves. That should be more than enough. All those other things when it comes to employment will come after.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really, yeah.
Okay, Miigwech, hi for your question, Andrea, and thank you, Belinda, once again. I hate to be the bad person here, but we're going to have to end our session very shortly. But before we ask Mary for some closing comments and a prayer so that we leave all in a good way, I just wanted to mention that when I talk to the elders back home, which is in Manitoba, this is what they say. Keguwi ka wani kehen gigigituin. Anish na kishemanito gigimi nigunanwe gigigituin inand. And what that means is that what the elders tell me back home or grandparents is that, like, don't ever forget your language because the language comes from the Creator. And I always think about that. So, miigwech, hi, masicho.